Hi guys, welcome back to EdTech Talks, where we explore the worlds of technology and education. I'm your host, Liam O'Carroll. Pleasure to be here, and we've got a very special guest joining us today to discuss a topic that is increasingly vital in our world. The topic is maintaining a delicate balance between sustainability and the carbon footprint of technology. In this episode, we're thrilled to welcome Barry Peake, the Sustainable Development Officer at Dublin City University. Barry brings a wealth of experience in promoting sustainability initiatives and a passion for integrating sustainable practices into educational frameworks. Barry is currently at the forefront of driving change within the university. You're very welcome, Barry.
Thank you very much.
So firstly, can you tell us about your role as Sustainable Development Officer at DCU and sort of what your primary responsibilities are?
Okay, well, I started, it's a relatively recent role. I was only appointed in January of this year. And interestingly, I'm DCU's first Education for Sustainable Development Officer. So it is a kind of new position. And that's not unusual. That tends to be the case throughout all of the Irish universities. So my role is really focused on teaching and learning. So rather than kind of sustainability at a kind of infrastructure or systems level, it's more to do with the teaching and learning. And I suppose primarily I'm there to kind of support the academics to integrate sustainable development and sustainability into their practice. So ultimately what should happen is that every student that comes through DCU should have some understanding of sustainable development and sustainability in their modules. So I work with everybody, whether they're like from physics to anthropology and engineering to business. All of those academics should integrate sustainable development into their practice. And I guess it's my job to support them to do that. So there's a few ways in which we do that. It's mainly through professional development and curriculum development. So with professional development, I do sort of workshops with the academics. I've designed a course on Loop, DCU's Moodle equivalent, to support them and make sure that they know kind of what's going on. And then on the curriculum development side of things, I sort of help them with reviewing their modules, reviewing their programs to see how we can integrate sustainable development into that. Because every discipline should be kind of taking sustainability and sustainable development more seriously. And some of them it comes very naturally to. Engineering would be one that kind of you can see the real kind of correlations or synergies with sustainability. But, you know, even the art subjects, with communications, it's about communicating around sustainability. With business, it's about doing business. You know, I always tell the joke, you know, the academics, it's their fault that we're in this mess, so they've got more to do. So the idea is just to support them all with that. And you know, it is. Yes, I've been here about 10 months, and it's been good so far. You know, I've kind of had some big wins, one or two challenges along the way, but yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a bit of a challenge getting everyone on board at the start when you're new to a role. I suppose looking at your background, Barry, you obviously started as a politics teacher and a history teacher up in Belfast. So sort of, I guess, how did you become interested in the education between, or interested in the intersection between education and the environment? Like, at what sort of stage did you think that you were going to go down the environmental route?
No, that's really interesting because in one way, I've always been interested in this, but on a professional level, it's been very, very new. So as you say, I was a school teacher. I taught politics and sociology in North Belfast, which was interesting at times. Yeah, absolutely.
Controversial.
You know, it could be controversial. I always tell the story. I did teach Jerry Adams' niece. I taught Jerry Kelly's daughter. Jeez. So, you know, sometimes you had to do a little uneducating before you did the educating. But that's another story for another time. But while I was there, I also kind of ran things like the Fair Trade Society. We had an Amnesty International group. So I was always very focused on that sort of social justice side of things. I was also a member of Friends of the Earth from about the age of 15. So it's always been there. The kind of whole sustainability, the climate thing has always been there. So whenever I moved to Dublin about 2013, I ended up working in an education charity for a lot of years. And again, that was working mainly with teachers to help them to integrate social justice into their practice. But of course, social justice, sustainability, global justice, climate justice all goes hand in hand. So my real skill was being able to work with the educators, work with the teachers and youth workers to get them to use methodologies or pedagogies. I promise, not too many technical terms, but you know, the pedagogies that will support them to integrate that approach into their practice. And I guess increasingly, so what we did, so it was an organisation called Young Social Innovators, and it was very much about allowing the young people to choose the social issues that they were interested in. And there's always kind of ones that kind of were popular. Youth mental health was always popular, homelessness was always popular, but increasingly in the last few years, sustainability and climate action and global justice came to the fore. So we had to up our game and get better at that sort of thing. So I ended up doing a postgrad certificate out in Maynooth in global citizenship education, which was amazing. I had 3 of the best teachers I ever had. The course was great, and that really kind of consolidated this idea in myself that, well, this is something I'm good at. I can, really focus in on that sweet spot between education and sustainability. And then when the position came up in DCU, I thought, I'll go for that, you know.
You backed yourself.
I backed myself. Yeah, it was a weird thing in the interview because I thought, I don't really have a chance here, because I'm just like a second school teacher, But I kind of went into the interview, and so I was super chilled. I was super relaxed because I didn't think I was in for the chance.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they started asking me really specific questions about that experience of working with the teachers and how to get them on board and bringing them along on the journey. And I kind of had this moment where I got, oh jeepers, I'm in with a shot here.
Yeah.
This is mine for the losing. And that's when I got really nervous and did my best to mess it up. But no, so that's at one level it's always been there. But in terms of thinking about it professionally, it's a fairly new thing for me.
Brilliant. That's perfect, Barry. I suppose when you go into a room full of teachers today, there's sort of a feeling when you start bringing up sustainability, environmental, it can be a chore sometimes for people. They might be looking at it negatively. How important do you think it is that we see in people's pastimes and hobbies? For example, we spoke before about Bohemians. They're the first club in Ireland to have an environmental officer. That sort of brings a positive aspect of it, and it gives people the initiative to want to get on board. How important do you think it is for DCU to bring that sort of thing in to get young people involved?
I think it's incredibly important. And it's funny that the work I did with the education charity, that's the one thing that we always pushed was there was always young people in the room who were reluctant to get involved, but there was always an in. There was always something that they were interested in, whether it's something like sport and the kind of connection between sustainability and sport, or fast fashion. That's a really good way to introduce themes around kind of, production and consumption and sustainability and how our behaviour has an impact on issues like sustainability. So those things are really important. It's important with the young people, but it's also really important with the academics as well, because a part of my job is making it easy for the academics, so helping them to identify where the synergies or where the connections are between what they're already doing, what they're already interested in, and how you can integrate sustainability into that. So, a good example would be I was working with somebody in computer sciences, and I noticed that one of their assessments was about, the most efficient way to do something. I was saying, okay, well, that's pretty good. But what if you just changed one word in the question and said, well, what's the most sustainable way of doing it? So instead of using the most processors to do it really quickly, try to make it work using the fewest processors. So it's always about kind of finding the easy solution. Because as you said, kind of going into a room full of, academics, lecturers, teachers, anybody, there is a real reluctance to it. The other thing is everybody's really busy. There's no getting away from that. And you're kind of coming in there going, okay, I want you to do one more thing. So you have an absolute responsibility to make it as easy as possible for them. And that's the thing. The Bohemians thing is a really good example, because I'll guarantee there are people in Phibsborough who've never thought about sustainability before, but all of a sudden it becomes like a community thing. It's about being part of the community. They recognise how it benefits the community. And another really important thing, I know I'm slightly digressing here, but I do think it's really important to understand how issues around sustainability and sustainable development are always connected to other issues as well. They're always connected to social class and race and ethnicity and migration and broader justice issues. So in a community, around a football club or around a university, you can always make those connections and make people realise, well, actually, it's not just about climate, it's about justice on a grander scale, and about making sure that all people can kind of reach their full potential and can flourish and all that good stuff,
Perfect. Yeah, I suppose it's about breaking it down into that people don't see this as some big problem that it's up for the leaders of the country to solve. Whereas you break it down to football clubs, like people feel involved and they say, okay, there's X or Y change that I could make by whether it's like showering less or recycling plastics or it's
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things, obviously, in terms of sustainability and sustainable development, the one thing that everybody's heard of is the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah.
These 17 goals agreed in 2015 that kind of all countries, whether it's Global North, Global South, should be working in partnership to achieve. One of the big things about the Sustainable Development Goals is that everybody should have the opportunity to contribute to them. So whether that's in their communities, through education, whatever means or mechanisms they have to contribute, they should have the opportunity to do it. So obviously leaders have an important role to play. And actually there was good research done recently about in terms of the behavioural change we need to tackle climate change, role models are really important. If we see leaders, you know, taking the initiative and doing good and, you know, how do you define a leader? Is it political leaders or is it people like Taylor Swift? Like, so whenever we see her doing, you know, not sustainable practices, does that have a negative? Exactly. Does that have a negative impact? Turns out it does. But the idea is, so yes, leaders, thought leaders, influencers, as the kids might say. But at the same time, everybody does. Not that everybody has the responsibility, but everybody should have the opportunity to do what they can, you know?
Brilliant, yeah, because I know, just touching on Taylor Swift there, it can be discouraging if you're looking at an English football club flying from London to Manchester and, you know, you're here using your paper straws and your small sacrifices and that sort of thing. But definitely keeping everyone on track is very important.
But sometimes I know I'm interrupting you. I know you've got a lot of questions there.
No,
but sometimes the good behaviours filter up as well as down.
Yeah.
You know, there's always been kind of examples of legislation passed, not because leaders put them in place, but because the culture changed. You know, the example I can always think about is, you know, smacking children. That used to be completely de rigueur. I was battered as a child. You know, there was nothing wrong with that. It was just like, yeah, that's what you did. But actually, there was a realization that shouldn't happen, and that sort of filtered up. And then the legislation changed. So sometimes, you know, just kind of good behavioural change can actually shift the culture completely, as well as it being top down.
Brilliant. And one of the things we've been noticing is DCU was recently ranked in the top 200 of worldwide universities for implementing carbon footprint practices. So is there any specific technologies or practices you've noticed recently in DCU that we should be looking out for the coming years or that have helped achieve this goal?
Yes, but I'm going to digress slightly, and I apologise for that.
That's allowed.
Because only last week, DCU also at Ireland's Climate Change Leadership Awards, we won Education Providers of the Year as well. So that was really good. The thing I will say is we have a good approach in DCU where we look at all the different things, not just technology. So, you know, myself, I have kind of primarily responsible for teaching and learning. So we're integrating sustainability and sustainable development into the teaching and learning. There's also the research thing, and it's such a huge thing that universities do, and DCU does do really good research around teaching and learning. The Water Institute is a good example, but also the Centre for Climate and Society is a really good example. But then you've got the infrastructure stuff as well, and DCU's carbon footprint, and we do very well on that. There's one or two things where we could do a lot better. Staff and student commuting is a big one, but also tendering. The stuff we buy into the university has a huge climate impact, and community engagement. That's the fourth area where I think DCU does quite well. You know, we will work with like local schools, local community groups, local businesses to try to get them involved in the whole sustainable things. So those four pillars, if you like, together have really kind of contributed to DCU's success in this area. With regard to specific technologies, I mean, I do think we have to be really cognizant of EdTech and educational technology for a lot of different reasons, because, you know, the theory behind them is ultimately really good. You know, they should democratize access to education. They should be able to like used in a flexible and inclusive way and meet the needs of the learner. But unfortunately, there is a huge environmental cost to them as well. You know, for different reasons. The main one is the fact that they require huge data centers, which requires a lot of water use, a lot of electronic waste, a lot of energy required. So I think we've got to be aware that kind of, so as we mentioned before, DCU has its Loop platform.
Yeah.
We have to enhance the good stuff about it. That kind of democratizing access, being flexible, meeting learners' needs, without becoming over reliant on it to the point that the carbon emissions and the other kind of forms of waste become too much. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I do think any discussion around EdTech has to talk about is AI, because I think it's becoming increasingly prevalent in everyone's educational experience, for better and worse. And there's kind of moral arguments on either side. But from my perspective, as the Education for Sustainable Development Officer, there's two things I would be really worried about. Mm-hmm. And the first one is the carbon emissions, which come from it. A kind of an AI search takes 10 times more energy than a Google search. So it really is it's quantity. Artificial intelligence isn't intelligent. It's just fast and big. It just kind of searches through stuff really quickly. So it takes a lot of energy. And the other thing I'd be concerned about with AI as a form of ed tech is the social justice side of things. The fact that, there's various levels of AI exist, and it's only certain people can afford the really good ones. Whereas kind of most of us are kind of still using, the
basics,
the basics, the free ones.
Yeah.
And that does, rather than democratizing access to education, it consolidates the disadvantages that some people have. So with regards to, technologies, I think, yes, we've got to be careful with those kind of educational platforms. And we've got to be careful about, whether the benefits outweigh the cost in terms of the green agenda. But also, I think we've got to be really focused on artificial intelligence. We're quite lucky in DCU in that we do have researchers who are looking into that all the time and trying to kind of improve things. But definitely something worth keeping an eye on.
I suppose noticing since coming back to final year in DCU, in the canteen, for example, we were looking at reusable knives and forks, for example, or people bringing in lunch boxes. If you're getting coffee, they want the reusable coffee cups. That's something that's been a huge change since first year. I suppose, is that something you can kind of claim, or are you attributing that to your role? Is that based off the research that we found? And I guess just in general, have you noticed DCU improving year on year?
I can absolutely take no credit for that whatsoever. All of those things were in track way before I got here. DCU has a sustainability manager. It's a woman called Samantha Fahy, and she does incredible work, especially on that kind of infrastructure side of things that I was mentioning. But also, it's worth saying that the students do great work as well. And the kind of students' demand for these things has really had an impact. You'll also notice that the canteens are no longer run by a big corporate body. I'll not mention their name in case we get into trouble. But that was very much pushed by the students because they don't have a good record on the environment. They also don't have a good record on other human rights things. So within the students' union, they're kind of organised. They're doing really good work. The pantry, which kind of works against food poverty, and of course they've got the kind of fashion swap shop thing as well, which is a great thing. So I think all of these little changes kind of all contribute to a much better culture around sustainability. Now, if I'm being completely honest, it's still difficult. We do have a student body of 19,000, and if I put out a call on something, you're lucky to get a couple of hundred responses. But it's growing, it's bubbling under, and it is one of those things. The more that it becomes the norm as opposed to the exception, and people get used to it, it definitely can't hurt. As I said, the one nut that tends to be really hard to crack is transport and the commuting to university. However, I do have a degree of sympathy there, because if you talk to any student now, concerns number one and number two are cost of living and cost of housing. So, sustainability is for understandable reasons. I nearly said selfish there, but it's not selfish, it's completely understandable. So, but I will say that all of these things are connected. I would suggest that kind of, cost of living, housing crisis, sustainability, they're all interlinked. And there's only so much we can do in a university to address all of these issues. It has to be a kind of whole of government and whole of society approach where we do work towards transformations that are maybe slightly more radical and inclusive and will get us to a kind of more sustainable and just and fair society.
And I suppose, like we've recently seen, there's been a call for a general election, so it's sort of on the politicians now to see what sort of ideas they can come up with. But yeah, definitely like student unions have been out protesting for about the lack of housing, and I suppose if everyone was to live closer to the campus, there'd be a lot less traffic, more space on the buses, etc.
And interesting, that again, just highlighting the fact that all of these things are connected. There is an argument that EdTech and kind of virtual classrooms and online classes, that's a solution to that. It's also a kind of solution to green problems, because it's less pen and papers, less commuting. But again, you've got that balance. Do the benefits of that outweigh the problems? And the problems being, well, the sustainability, the climate related ones, but also the fact that nobody's going to have a good time sitting in their bedroom online for every class. That sort of community social thing that happens at university is really important. Just in terms of becoming a fully functioning human being, which university should kind of result in.
Yeah, like you mentioned there's a lot of students being missed out on Loop, for example. I suppose us as digital business students, it's probably the onus would be on us then to say, how do we take your brilliant messages and spread them to all our colleagues across Loop? And that's something we'll certainly have to have a look at. What do you think are the primary barriers that companies face in implementing sustainable practices?
There's a question.
Yeah. And sorry,
that's it's profit. If you're a business, if you're a private company, your primary objective is to meet your shareholders' needs, and you've got a board, and all of these things are important. So obviously, in terms of integrating sustainable practices, that's got to be at the forefront of their mind. And there's still that culture in business that kind of sustainability. For a long time it was, what was the expression? It's totally left me.
It's as if it's like the last sort of criteria that needs to be hit. It's like they'll make the profit first, and then at the end we'll just tick that little box.
Corporate social responsibility. Like for a long time, everything was about corporate social responsibility and what companies could do, to kind of be involved in social justice or kind of charity initiatives. Sustainability has sort of taken that role now. But of course, whenever a lot of companies do it, it becomes greenwashing. It becomes just a part of their marketing to be seen to be doing the right thing as opposed to actually doing the right thing. And from one perspective, that makes total sense. They are companies. Their modus operandi is to make money, which is almost admirable in a sense. However, things have gotten so bad now. The expression that we always use is business as usual, but greener, is no longer appropriate. And that's not going to get us where we need to go. And there needs to be real radical transformations in the business world and in farming and in education and in the public sector if we are going to kind of, I have a real issue with people who are too doom-laden in these messages. But in terms of kind of, our planetary boundaries, things like climate change, biodiversity loss, ocean acidification, we are rapidly approaching really significant tipping points that will have a dramatic negative effect on all life on this planet, human and non-human, which could lead to the displacement of populations, huge amounts of social unrest, huge amounts of climate-caused migration. So we are at a point where it absolutely has to be done, and all other considerations must become secondary to it. However, that's really difficult. The mood in the room has changed, and it all got very serious there for a while.
No, I know. Sure, even we've seen in the news lately, for example, in like the likes of Barcelona and Valencia, there's been multiple lives lost due to flooding. I suppose if I was to ask you if you could change one thing about DCU tomorrow, bring in your own rule to try and reduce its carbon footprint, what would you be looking at?
I don't think it would be a rule. I think, in terms, and I'm going to suggest something maybe controversial here.
Yeah, perfect.
The carbon footprint, well, it's not controversial.
That'll get our views up.
Yeah, the carbon footprint isn't the issue with DCU. In terms of what an Irish university can do, because if you look at kind of the amount of carbon emissions that Ireland produces, the public sector produces a tiny proportion of that, and universities are a tiny proportion of the public sector.
Yes.
So in terms of our carbon emissions here, it's not great. What we need to do is focus on the things that we do well. And what we do well is teaching and learning and research. So if we can integrate sustainable development, climate literacy, encouraging political and climate action into every module and every program in DCU. Would I make it compulsory? If I could, I would, but I think that's a big ask for the for the academics. But definitely that would be point number one. Make sure that kind of climate literacy, sustainable development is integrated into every program in a structured way, so that it's not just kind of, okay, in year one you do a little bit about the SDGs and you never think about it again. That would be a big thing, and I would kind of recommend more investment in the research side. So that would be my big thing. Yes, the carbon stuff is really important, and it's really important in terms of normalizing behavioral change and getting a culture of good practices. However, the real thing where universities can do real work is in the teaching and learning, having an impact on the young people in terms of their values, their behaviours and their actions, and then the research side as well. So if I had my magic wand, that would be the one.
That would be, brilliant. It's a good idea. I certainly remember back to being in secondary school learning about the SDGs that you've touched on. We had a subject called CSPE where you learnt about them, you sort of watch videos, you saw the detrimental impacts it was having. But obviously that doomsday scenario, that can sort of discourage people because they're sort of thinking, oh, well, we're going to end up here anyway, so it's gone too far. So there definitely has to be a positive sort of outlook on it, and this is the positive impacts your changes can have.
It really is, and foregrounding hope, you know, and foregrounding emotion as well. Again, I'll go a little bit off topic here, but the Institute of Education in DCU, there's a couple of academics down there that look very much at sort of affective pedagogies, so engaging with young people on an emotional level, not just talking about the science, because the science is horrendous. There's no getting around that. But if you talk about kind of the emotional side of it, how does it make you feel, and how can you translate? There's one woman called Rowan Oberman who talks about kind of, if you look at very sad stories even, they can be cathartic, and they can actually result in positive emotions. They can kind of result in young people thinking, well, I've got to do something about this. I've got to, be more empathetic and resilient and hopeful and all of those things that will get us. Because, hope begets action and action begets hope. And it becomes like a virtuous circle,
Perfect. That's brilliant, Barry. Thanks very much for joining us today. I had a great time chatting through you. You had some brilliant insights there and shedding your expertise. And I sort of hope that motivates everyone to take a more sustainable step. And thanks, guys, for joining us at EdTech Talks.
Thanks a million. All the very best.
Cheers, Barry.